some kind of disorder going on that's related to drugs. Maybe not directly. Maybe they were using drugs and got hurt, but it's something related to it. 2.6 million people with addictions have a dependence on alcohol and drugs. In the counseling world, we call that comorbidity. They have both those two addictions. 6.8 million with addiction have a mental illness. In working with men and women that have addictions, one of the things that's difficult for me to determine is, did they have a mental condition that led to the addiction, or did the addiction lead to them having a mental condition? And really the only way you can find that out is to get them clean long enough that you can determine if there's something else going on. Here's something that really bothers me, is rates of illicit drug use is highest among 18 to 25-year-olds. So this influence, this demonic influence, this addiction strikes at our young people before their brains are even fully developed. Nowadays they talk about your brain is not fully developed until you're 25 years of age. So it's attacking the youth of our country in a huge way. 90% of those with addiction began using illicit drugs before the age of 18. That's just hard to imagine. So our young people are being attacked at an early age with addictions. And if you just look at the cost, the financial cost, $600 billion a year is lost due to drug and alcohol addiction. $600 billion a year. And that figure is a few years old. So this thing that we call addiction is not only destroying families and relationships, it's taken all the resources, financial resources, and it puts them in a very, very dark place, like the little bird was at the end of that video. Very, very dark place. So how does this all play out? How does this work out? What happens in addiction? And at the end of our time today, I'm going to save 10 minutes for a Q&A, because a lot of people that aren't addicted have friends that are addicted and they don't understand what's going on in that addiction. We're a culture that has developed the need for instant gratification. We want it to happen right now. And I'm as guilty as the next person. I watch Netflix because I don't want to watch the commercials, because I want to see the show right now. I don't want to have to take a break and watch the commercials, or I'll flick from one channel to the next. So we are designed, or not designed, but we have developed this need for instant gratification. And we're bored. When we become depressed or tired, we immediately look for something to make that feeling go away. We don't know how to bear up gracefully in the time of need, because the societal message is that we don't need to suffer, which is really not the biblical message. The Bible actually promises, in this world you will have tribulation. So be of good cheer, for I've overcome the world. So in Galatians 5:1, this is one of my favorite verses when I'm talking to folks about addiction. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by the yoke of slavery. So I guess before we go too much further, we maybe ought to define what addiction is. And let me start with a medical definition of what it is. This is from Dr. Bernard Green, who's one of the leaders in the field of addiction. The experience of being unable to immediately and permanently stop the misuse of a drug or harmful habit. Notice he includes habits, not just drugs and alcohol, without suffering some degree of discomfort. The substance or process once sought to fill the emotional void and bring pleasure becomes the slave driver. We talked about that last week, being enslaved to sin. It demands repetitive use and threatens the victim with painful withdrawals. Most of us think about addiction in terms of alcohol and drugs, and most of the folks I work with, that's what I'm working with them on. But addiction spreads across many venues. Some people are addicted to drugs and alcohol. Some people are addicted to gambling. Some people are addicted to pornography. Some people are addicted to power. So there's all kinds of addictions, but at the end of the day, what the addiction or what the substance or the practice is trying to do is to fill an unmet need. You have a feeling of an unmet need that you're trying to fill with something other than God. And when we do that, really by definition, that's a sin, isn't it? When we turn to something other than God for our need, for our help, other than God, we turn to something. We're turning away from God and towards something else, which is a sin by definition. So when did it first start? I love this picture here. When did addiction start? Obviously, it started in Genesis 3. It started in the Garden of Eden. It started when we, Adam and Eve, we wanted something that God had told us we didn't need and told us not to do, and we decided we had an unmet need to know that and turned away from Him and towards sin. So it started at the very beginning in the garden. So for a Christian, the definition it's a little different, I think. Addiction is the old Adam's domination. It is when a Christian turns again and again to an idol to fulfill a need instead of turning to God for that need. That's what I said a minute ago. It means the eventual destruction of new man. And this spiritual problem accompanies the physical addiction. I think it's good that we hear from folks that, not just from me, but from folks who have struggled with this, and God has set free from this. And I'd like to ask Rita, I'm not sure where she is, if she would come forward right now. Did I lose you, Rita? There you are. You ready?
I guess so.
You guess so.
Good morning, everyone. A lot of you know me. A lot of you don't. My journey started in a military family, my stepfather and my mom, and very, very strict, almost unfair. It made me a very angry child. Under the age of 10, I was sexually molested by one of my father's cohorts in the service. I told my mother, and she didn't do anything about it. So, as a young child, thinking that my parents loved me and wanted to take care of me, I formed an opinion that nobody did. Later years, I was still angry. I was a loner. I hated myself. When I became a teenager, I started doing drugs and alcohol, was very promiscuous. I wanted to die. I would pick people out to try to beat me up and to death. When you're in an addiction, you will try anything to not be loved. For those of you who are addicted, you feel like you are in this cavern, and you are down here, and you're screaming to get out. And no one hears you, but God hears you, because God heard me. He does love you. He will save you. That's why He knelt and said nothing when they were beating Him with the cat o' nine tails. He spoke not a word. He went willingly to the cross to cover a multitude of my sin and your sin. And He has set me free from all degradation, from all the enemy's lies, from all the enemy's plans to kill me, because He knows that now that I am saved and the Spirit is of Jesus Christ and God is within me, I'm a powerhouse for God. This is my ministry for hurt people, and heal people. And Jesus is the answer to everything that you have going on in your life. Do not harden your heart any longer. He is calling you, and He will make your life wonderful and show you the glory and the mercy that you deserve, and set you up on high with him. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks. So let's talk a little more about understanding the problem. Again, as I said a couple of times already, addicts feel that their basic needs are not being met. They are hurt. The world hurts them. You heard Rita talk about how the world hurt her. And through that hurt, she felt the need to turn to something to alleviate that pain. Addicts have not learned how to cope with the problems of life, often because of events like you heard from Rita, where they've been hurt or they've been in some difficult situations and their development hasn't been what it should be. Not always, but often that's the case. And they can't seem to resolve their personal or spiritual conflicts in a responsible way. So those are the things that I see. So why do we go down that road to addiction? Well, first of all, is peer pressure. I've always been disappointed in the video of the little bird that there wasn't another one walking along pointing to the substance, because that's kind of what happens. There is a tremendous amount of peer pressure to use. And those of you that are in the right age group here, you know what I'm talking about. If you go to a party or to an event, it's going to be present there unless it's very well supervised. And it's not cool if you don't try it. And the lie is that you can try it one time and it'll be okay. One time will be okay. The second thing is the great escape. And that's, you heard a little bit of that in Rita's testimony. The world has hurt you and you're in pain, emotional, sometimes physical pain. And you want to escape that feeling. You don't want to feel that way. And so you're seeking and looking for a way to escape that pain. And sometimes it's purely a survivor mode. The only way that you feel like you can exist and live in the midst of everything that's going on, the only way you can survive is if you're under the influence of drugs or alcohol. The trouble is that it's a great big lie. That, as you saw with the bird, after the first time it's less and then less and then less, and finally you're hooked on the drug or alcohol, but it doesn't make you fly like the little bird did to begin with. So sometimes it's survival, and finally and ultimately it's to stop pain. One of the rising forms of addiction that I deal with on a regular basis is painkillers. I don't know if any of you have ever taken painkillers. Excuse me. They cannot tell you how many times I have men and women come to me that say, I hurt my back or I hurt whatever. And I started taking, and the doctor prescribed pain meds to me. And I love doctors, but they very seldom tell someone, only take one when you have to. And they will prescribe over and over again for pain meds, as opposed to saying, I'm going to give you 2 days worth or 3 days worth, and then you come back and we'll examine and see where you are. And the next thing you know, that person is addicted to painkillers. And it's very common. So there's a cycle that develops in addiction, and I want us to take a look at it. And we've already talked about it a little bit. It starts out with some form of stress or pain. It can be emotional pain. It can be, as Rita was talking, something that's happened to her when she was younger, how she was sexually abused when she was younger, and it hurt her emotionally. Or it can be physical pain. It can be high levels of stress that that you can't figure a way out of the situation that you're in. So it starts with that. And then this next step that's listed here is contemplation. You start trying to figure how you can make the pain or the stress go away. And it's at this point when I'm counseling with men and women, at this point, if you'll call me, I can help you before you get into these next levels of the cycle. Because your brain is not working rationally here. You're not thinking rationally. It's an emotional need that you have. And sometimes talking to someone and kind of talking them through where they're at can stop the cycle here. It moves on into obsession. and it is obsession. That's a great word for it. Addicts will do anything they have to get the fix, the drug or the alcohol. They will lie. They will sell their cars. They will hurt their family. And very often when I counsel with families, I tell them, listen, this is not your loved one. This is the drug that's doing this. But it's a real obsession. They'll do anything to get it. And then it leads into compulsivity. In other words, you're compelled to stay in the addiction. You can't stop on your own. You can't do it on your own. There's no way. And indulgence, use. At that point, you realize you give in and you're going to use whatever it is that you're using. And then you go into denial. And you lie to yourself. And you say, and I've heard this so many times, I can handle this. And the reality is they cannot handle it. And they deny that they have a problem. And in the use and the denial, guess what happens? They start feeling convicted, and shame and guilt comes on board and makes them have that same kind of pain or stress. And guess what that leads right back to? This whole cycle again. So very often it's just like this vicious cycle that goes around and around and around, and it goes over and over again. And I'm not even talking about the physical addiction part of it with alcohol. This is more a look at the emotional side of it. And if you think about it, so think a little broader here. If you think of addiction like sin, and it is sin, doesn't sin look the same way? If you go to the next slide for me, please. Same kind of thing. It starts out with stress or pain, and you don't turn to God, and you don't turn to his fellow believers. It leads you into trying to decide if you're going to do whatever it is that's sinful that you're being tempted with, and it goes right back into obsession. You see how this cycle, it's really the same kind of cycle that we see in sin. And after you sin, how do you feel? You feel ashamed. You feel guilty. Hopefully you feel more convicted by the Holy Spirit, but most of the time it's shame and guilt that you get, and it leads you right back into the cycle again of sinning all over again. So I want us to take a look. David has used this particular slide. If you go to the next one for me. This is one of my favorite slides. It gives a great picture, a biblical picture of humanity and who we are. And if you'll remember, in the center is the Spirit. It's the part of us that God, in my opinion, breathed into us. The Bible, the Hebrew word for that is ruach, which means great wind, but it's really describing the breath of God. In other words, we have a spirit that God gave us. Once we become a believer, the Holy Spirit resides in that same spot with us. It's not too crowded with the Spirit and the Holy Spirit in there. And then there's a part of us that is the soul. The soul is the part, the thinking, the mind, the emotions, what you believe, what your will is where it resides in the soul. And then the flesh, the body, is part of the flesh. And the Bible talks a lot. It's the dwelling place for the Holy Spirit and the dwelling place for your spirit. So what happens in addiction, I want to add one little component to this. And you heard Rita talk about how she was hurt deeply when she was a very young child or young person. And that hurt creates a scar. It creates a broken place in the soul. It creates a place where Satan can come in and live and speak all kinds of lies to you. And very often, those deep hurts, that's a picture of a stronghold. It's what I call a stronghold. It's in your soul. It's in that part of you that talks to you every day, that part where you're trying to make decisions. And it speaks lies to you over and over again. It says things to you like, my body is my own and I can do with it what I want. It's a lie. My addiction doesn't hurt anyone else. I've heard that over and over again. It does hurt other people because other people care for you and love you. I really need it when I get low. It isn't as bad as what some other people do. Those kind of thoughts and One of the biggest lies it tells you is that Satan tells you that although you're hurt here, you can handle this. You don't need God. You don't need God. You can deal with this on your own. And the answer is you really can't. You can't deal with it on your own. And it becomes a stronghold. So it's really not the drugs and alcohol that are the issue. Because in and of themselves, they're not sin. The Bible talks about alcohol and talks about not being drunk. It doesn't talk about not drinking. It's not the drugs and alcohol that are the problem. Drugs are used in critical situations like operations where we don't want someone cutting us open without being medicated. They're not bad. The drugs aren't bad. What's happening is this brokenness, this hurt places in our lives. And this shows one. There usually are many. And one will lead to another and another. It's these places that were hurt that are not healed that you need to bring to God and get healing for. And when those places are healed, the need for drugs and alcohol is taken away. So does Christ want to heal our brokenness? Yes. And I tell people this all the time. There is nothing that you've done, no amount of pain you've suffered, no sin that you've created that's too big for God to forgive, or no hurt that's too big for Him to heal. Isaiah 53:5, He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon Him, and with His stripes we are healed. And very often, addicts don't believe that can happen. They don't believe there's any way to get healing and forgiveness for what they've done. Jesus said to them, heal the sick, Matthew 10:8. Cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. So what I found in the counseling that I do is there is a part of this that has to do with changing habits, learning to live differently. But the big part of this has to do with the supernatural power of Christ to heal our woundedness, to get rid of those things that have happened in our life that have damaged us. It doesn't matter what's happened to us. It does matter to us, of course, but to God it doesn't matter. There's no limit to His desire to heal, His willingness to heal, and His power to heal. And when I see that happen in the folks that I counsel with, when they start believing that, God heals those places. And I start hearing back from them things like, I don't even think about using drugs anymore. I don't even think about alcohol. It's not even in my mind anymore. So Christ does want to heal our brokenness. So what I want to do now is talk a little, and I'm going to skip a slide here, about how we can help them. How do you help these folks that you know that are in your immediate circles that are addicted to drugs or alcohol or whatever it may be? You need to help them find healing for their addiction and deep hurts. We talked last week about Fresh Wind. It's an 8-week ministry for men that have addiction issues. It starts July 3rd. There's a flyer in your handout about it. You probably know somebody that needs help. No person will be turned away because of finances. If they don't have any money, we're going to take them. We're going to still take them in the program. So that's a critical part that you can play. There's some other ways, if you look at the flyer, that you can help with that ministry as it starts up. Support ministries that are called to help through prayer. We're creating a prayer website for Fresh Wind, and it'll be in next week's handout so you can see it, where you can go and sign up for prayer times during those 8 weeks that we're with these men. Finances. Sometimes there are financial issues that keep men and women from getting help and intervention. Taking that person to someone like me or someone who does this kind of work and having an intervention with them, helping them break that chain of addiction that we were talking about. Help them understand where they're at and what's happened to them, and not judge. I can't afford to judge anybody. I don't know about y'all, but it's way too expensive for me. I can't afford to judge anybody. If I'd have been through some of the things these people have been through, I would be in their situation, I have no doubt. And pray. Continue to pray, because God has taught me that prayer can heal when nothing else can. And so pray with them, pray for them, pray for the ministry, the people that do this ministry. So I want to take a few minutes, if I could get some help. Those of you that are going to help with the Q&A, there's a couple of mics, I think. I don't know who's... There you go. Because I know you might have some questions. Addiction's kind of hard to understand. And, what we want to do is, what we want to say as people that aren't addicted is just stop. Why don't you just stop using? Well, that's why it's called an addiction. They can't without help. They want to, but they can't without help. And there's a lot of other questions. So has anybody got a couple of questions, 2 or 3 questions about addiction?
Jerry, I got one. The process of healing. We know that God can instantly heal. Often it's a process. And I know it depends on the degree of addiction, but maybe just address that, because I think it's important we understand that healing doesn't occur overnight. Sometimes it does, but not usually. Maybe just a little bit about that process, how long it often occurs. Why is this group 8 weeks?
Right. So if you had to guess, what would you guess is the average number of addictions and relapses into recovery? Does anybody have an idea how many times someone's going to go through that cycle of addiction, recovery, go back in addiction? You have any guesses? 8? You said that very close. Anybody else? 6? How about right in between? 7? The average number is 7. So what happens is we lead someone and help them get help, and we feel like it should happen to them immediately that first time. And as David said, it can't happen that way. I've seen God do that. I've seen God just jerk somebody up and heal them, and that's it. They're through with it. And that's up to God. And man, I wish He'd do it all the time. But it just doesn't work that way. What usually happens is a series of using, being clean, using, being clean. And what I have to do as a counselor, and what we need to understand, is it's a process that they go through. Each time, God heals them a little bit more. And what I really believe happens is God will heal them as much as they'll let Him heal them. So it is a definite process. And what we have to do, the hardest thing I do is knowing someone I'm working with is back using again and trying to grab them when they're ready to start attacking it again and going through those cycles with them over and over again. But it's worth it. I've seen men that have been addicted to heroin for 15 years that have been clean. 2 of them I know about now are going into the ministry in seminary. So, those victories really fuel me and keep me going, because very often you have to go through those cycles with them over and over again. What else? Over here. Mm-hmm.
It's great that there's opportunities for men that are addicted. I just had a question. What about for women that are addicted? Is there anything that you guys are doing with your ministry that could be offered to women here in the church?
I didn't catch that.
There is addiction help for men. Is there anything we are planning to do as a church for women?
I would very much like to do that, but as a man, I got to have help with that. I've got to have a woman that's ready for that. Doing this across genders is not always helpful, and I'm not saying I couldn't counsel with women. I do, but on a limited basis. Yes. Right now, I just want to get fresh wind off the ground and running and see the Lord start healing some people. But I very much would like to. One of the troubles with this ministry is that there is much less help for women that are addicted than men. And as a gender, women are rapidly increasing in terms of addiction. 10 years ago, men, it was more a man's, it wasn't all a man's problem. I'm just saying in the last 10 years, women have really stepped up their addiction use. And so, yeah, we'll need to address that. I'm counting on the Lord sending me a woman that's as passionate about and called to doing this as I am. But yeah, that would be great.
You might refer women to where Caroline Stout works at Penfield.
Pardon me?
At Penfield in Livonia, where Caroline Stout works. And also women bring with them issues that men don't bring with them when they come into treatment, such as children, pregnancies, that kind of thing. And it's not that we don't want to help women. It's just that it takes many more resources. And I encourage everyone to really be in prayer about how God would provide so that we could minister to not only men but also to women and the children born and unborn, that they bring with them into treatment.
Yeah. There are a few addiction places for women that have children where children can stay with them, but not in Georgia. I only know of one right now. Pardon me? It's opened back up again, but it's hard because you've got the children involved, and unfortunately, this happens a lot. It's not usually just a woman that's addicted, but very often her husband too. And so you've got doing addiction, helping folks that are addicted is messy. It affects all kinds of things, the children, the families, all of that. Someone over here? Yeah. Hey.
Would you say that a lot of what fuels addiction is problems from childhood most of the time?
It's problems with what?
From someone's childhood, from their childhood?
I see it a lot.
Does that trigger a lot? So would working through issues from their childhood, like going to counseling coupled with working to break the cycles of addiction, would that help more, do you think?
Oh, yeah. You got to get to that hurt place, those hurt places. And when I was the director of Victory Home, I had a question on my survey that I gave every time someone came in, and it said, have you ever been sexually, physically, or emotionally abused? 80% of them were either sexually or physically abused when they were younger. So that's, I'm talking about over 150, 200 men. I think it's a significant cross-section. So yeah, you definitely, and sometimes we don't even know how we got hurt because we bury it so deep. It's there, and that little stronghold is working on us, and those little lies are getting us all the time, but we're not even aware. We've had to shut it away to even exist. And when you get to talking to them and working with them and digging around a little bit, it comes up. And that's where a prayer is significantly. One of the different things we're doing in Fresh Wind, and I want to say this and then we got to close it up, is the Lord has revealed to me that through directed prayer, He can and will heal those places that you're talking about, those deep hurts that happened when they were younger. And so in Fresh Wind, the first 2 hours of every day with these men is going to be devoted to teaching them to pray, because a lot of them don't know how to pray. And also finding out, digging around and finding those places where they've been hurt deeply and having a prayer team direct prayer at those places of hurt, because it needs supernatural help, in my opinion. Christian recovery is 5 times more successful than secular. And there's a reason, because the power of God is in it. Secular recovery is often about just not using, which is a good thing, but there's no healing in that to me. The Bible says it's for freedom I've set you free. And when they get that healing from God, they're free. So be praying about Fresh Wind. If you'd like to help in any way, the best way you can help is to pray. And if you know someone, give them a flyer. There's brochures out front. Have them call me, and I'll talk with them, and we'll try to get them in here and give them help. So think about that and be ready for that.